Dr. Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock on her laboratory wall. 3 in the morning, and she was still hunched over her microscope, studying tissue samples from patients with Huntington's disease. The genetic disorder had been her obsession for the past 7 years, ever since her own father had succumbed to its merciless progression. Every tremor, every lost memory, every moment of confusion had driven her deeper into her research. The laboratory was quiet except for the gentle hum of equipment and the soft clicking of her mechanical pencil as she made notes. Her latest experiment with modified neural stem cells showed promise, but she was still years away from a viable treatment. Years that too many patients didn't have. A sharp beeping sound broke through her concentration. Sarah frowned and looked around, trying to identify the source. It wasn't her computer, her phone, or any of the familiar laboratory equipment. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, growing louder and more insistent. Then the air in front of her desk began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Sarah pushed back her chair, heart racing, as the shimmer coalesced into a translucent blue rectangle hanging in the air. Static crackled across its surface, then cleared to reveal the most extraordinary sight she had ever witnessed. A child was looking back at her through what appeared to be some kind of three-dimensional video screen. But this was no human child. The being had large, luminous golden eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence far beyond their apparent age. Their skin was a soft lavender hue, and delicate tendrils of what might have been hair or some other sensory organ framed an elfin face. The child wore clothing that seemed to shift color like oil on water. What struck Sarah most powerfully was the expression of desperate hope on the child's face, mixed with tears that appeared to be literally glowing as they fell. "Please," the child said, and somehow Sarah understood perfectly, despite never hearing the language before. "You are Dr. Sarah Chen, the neurologist from Earth?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. After a moment, she managed to croak, "How? What? Who are you?" "My name is Zeph," the child said, wiping away more luminescent tears. "I come from the Andorian Collective, 3-star systems from yours. We have been monitoring your research for some time. My mother," Zeph's voice broke. "My mother is very sick, and no one in the galaxy can help her. But we think, maybe you can." "I don't understand," Sarah said, finally finding her voice. "How is this possible? How are you communicating with me? How do you even know about my research?" Zeph's large eyes grew even more earnest. "Dr. Chen, your species may seem primitive to most galactic civilizations, but you have something we have lost. You study diseases that our technology eliminated from our societies thousands of years ago. We can cure quantum cancer. We can regenerate entire organs. We can even transfer consciousness between bodies. But the simple neurological disorders, we have forgotten how to treat them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of neurological disorder?" "She shakes," Zeph whispered, fresh tears flowing. "It started small, just her hands when she was working. But now it's her whole body. She can't eat, she can't sleep, she can't work. Our doctors say her neural pathways are degrading, but they don't know why or how to stop it. They want to transfer her consciousness to a new body, but she refuses. She says she wants to keep the body that carried me, that held me when I was small." The description hit Sarah like a physical blow. The symptoms Zeph described were heartbreakingly familiar. "How long has this been happening?" 2 of your years, Zeph said. "It gets worse every day. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. But I've been studying your work, Dr. Chen. You've dedicated your life to these kinds of problems. You understand them in ways our people have forgotten." Sarah leaned forward, her scientific mind racing despite the impossibility of the situation. "Can you describe the progression in more detail? When did the tremors start? Are they worse at rest or during movement? Does she have any cognitive symptoms?" For the next 30 minutes, Zeph described their mother's condition with the precision of someone who had been living with it every day, watching it steal away pieces of the person they loved most. The symptoms aligned almost perfectly with Huntington's disease, but with some variations that suggested either a genetic mutation or possibly an entirely different mechanism causing similar effects. "Zeph," Sarah said finally, "even if I wanted to help, I'm just one person with a small laboratory on Earth. I don't have the technology to travel between star systems, and I don't know anything about your species' biology." "We can bring you to us," Zeph said quickly. "Our ships are fast, and we have translation devices that will let you communicate with everyone. As for our biology..." The child paused, looking uncertain for the first time. That's more complicated. We've evolved differently than humans, but our neural systems share surprising similarities. That's why our scientists think you might be able to help. Sarah ran her hands through her hair, trying to process what was happening. Everything logical told her this was impossible, that she was having some kind of breakdown from working too many hours without sleep. But the desperate hope in Zeph's eyes was too real, too authentic to ignore. Why me specifically? She asked. Surely there are other neurologists, other researchers who might be more qualified. Because, Zeph said softly, you're the only one who hasn't given up. I've read all your papers, Dr. Chen. I've watched your interviews. When other scientists say a disease is incurable, you say it's just not cured yet. When they focus on managing symptoms, you focus on understanding causes. My mother needs someone who won't give up on her. The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She thought of her father, of the months she'd spent researching experimental treatments that never materialized in time. She thought of all the patients she'd met over the years, all the families who had come to her with that same desperate hope now shining in Zeph's golden eyes. If I agreed to help, she said slowly, what would that involve exactly? Zeph's face lit up with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from the child. We would send a ship to collect you. The journey would take 3 of your days. You would be treated as an honored guest and provided with everything you need. Our medical facilities are very advanced, and you would have access to diagnostic tools beyond anything available on Earth. And my own research, my responsibilities here? Time moves differently during faster-than-light travel, Zeph explained. The 3 days you spend traveling to us would pass as only 3 hours on Earth. When you return, very little time will have passed here. Sarah felt her scientific skepticism warring with something else, something that had driven her into medicine in the first place, the desire to heal, to solve puzzles that others couldn't solve, to bring hope where there was none. I have one condition, she said finally. Anything, Zeph breathed. I want to bring some of my equipment and research materials. If I'm going to help your mother, I'll need tools I'm familiar with, and I'll need access to my own data on similar conditions. Of course. We can accommodate anything you need. Sarah took a deep breath, hardly believing the words that were about to come out of her mouth. All right, Zeph. I'll help you. When do we leave? The child's joy was infectious, their entire being seeming to glow with relief and happiness. Tomorrow night, if you're ready. Our ship will arrive at the coordinates I'm about to send you. As Zeph spoke, Sarah's computer chirped, and she looked to see a new file had appeared on her desktop, containing what appeared to be precise geographical coordinates for a location about 50 miles outside the city. Dr. Chen, Zeph said, their voice trembling with emotion. Thank you. You don't know what this means to my family, to my mother. In our culture, we have a saying, hope is the bridge between heartbreak and healing. You've just built that bridge for us. The transmission began to flicker and fade. I'll see you tomorrow night. Zeph called out as their image dissolved back into shimmering air. Sarah sat in the sudden silence of her laboratory, staring at the empty space where the impossible communication device had been. She looked down at her hands, half expecting them to be shaking from adrenaline, but they were steady. 4 hours to prepare for an interstellar journey to treat an alien patient with a familiar disease. She stood up abruptly and began moving around the laboratory with purpose. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. She pulled out several hard cases and began carefully packing her most essential equipment. Portable microscopes, sample containers, basic diagnostic tools, and most importantly, her complete research files on neurological disorders. As she worked, her mind raced through everything she would need to consider. Alien physiology might require completely different approaches. Their technology could provide diagnostic capabilities she'd only dreamed of. But at the core, if Zeph's description was accurate, she was dealing with the same type of neural degradation she'd been studying for years. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career trying to solve problems that advanced alien civilizations had apparently already conquered, only to discover that their advancement had left them helpless against the very diseases she specialized in. She paused in her packing as a thought struck her. What if this wasn't just about helping one alien family? What if this was an opportunity to learn from medical technology centuries ahead of Earth's, to gain insights that could help countless patients back home? Sarah looked at the framed photo on her desk, showing her father in healthier days before the disease had taken him. I wish you were here to see this, Dad, she whispered. I think you'd be proud. The next day passed in a blur of preparation and barely controlled excitement. Sarah arranged for her research assistant to cover her classes and laboratory responsibilities, claiming a family emergency that required immediate travel. She updated her research files and backed up everything to secure servers. As evening approached, she found herself driving through the countryside toward the coordinates Zeph had provided, her packed equipment secured in the back of her car. The location turned out to be an empty field far from any major roads or population centers, exactly the kind of place where a spaceship could land without attracting attention. She parked at the edge of the field and got out, breathing in the cool night air. Above her, stars twinkled in the clear sky, and she wondered which one was home to Zeph and their sick mother. At exactly the time Zeph had specified, the air above the field began to shimmer with the same heatwave effect Sarah had seen in her laboratory. But this time, it wasn't just a communication device materializing. The shimmer expanded and solidified into the hull of a ship unlike anything she'd ever imagined. It was elegant and organic looking, more grown than built, with smooth curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in motion. Soft bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently along its surface, and as she watched, an opening appeared without any visible seams or doors. Zeph emerged from the ship, no longer just a holographic image, but a real living being walking across the field toward her. The child was smaller than Sarah had expected, barely reaching her shoulder, but moved with a graceful confidence that spoke of advanced development despite their apparent youth. "Dr. Wall." "Chen," Zeph called out, their voice filled with joy. "You came. I was so afraid you might change your mind." "I gave you my word," Sarah said, surprised by how natural it felt to be talking to an alien child in the middle of a field. "I brought everything I thought might be useful." Two other beings emerged from the ship, taller than Zeph but with the same basic physiological structure. They approached respectfully and began collecting Sarah's equipment with careful, efficient movements. "These are my aunts, Kira and Vel," Zeph explained. "They're part of our ship's medical team. They don't speak your language yet, but they're very excited to meet you." The two adults bowed slightly to Sarah, their golden eyes warm and welcoming despite the obvious differences in species. One of them, Kira, said something in their musical language, and Zeph translated. She says thank you for coming, and that our people will never forget your kindness. As they walked toward the ship together, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She was about to embark on humanity's first documented interstellar medical mission, carrying with her not just the hope of one alien family, but potentially the key to advancing medical knowledge for both their species. The ship's interior was as beautiful as its exterior, with walls that seemed to pulse gently with their own inner light. Comfortable seating areas were arranged around what appeared to be viewing screens, and the whole space had an organic living quality that made Sarah feel as though she were inside some kind of beneficial organism rather than a machine. "The journey will begin shortly," Zeph explained as Sarah settled into a seat that somehow molded itself perfectly to her body. "You should sleep during the trip. When you wake up, we'll be in my home system, and you'll be able to meet my mother." As the ship lifted off with barely a whisper of sound, Sarah watched Earth shrink away through the transparent sections of the hull. She was leaving everything familiar behind, carrying nothing but her knowledge, her determination, and a promise made to a desperate child whose tears could dissolve metal, but whose love for their mother had bridged the gap between worlds. The stars ahead grew brighter as the ship accelerated beyond anything possible with human technology, and Sarah closed her eyes, preparing herself for whatever awaited her in the depths of space. Somewhere among those stars was a mother whose trembling hands held the same hope Sarah had seen in countless patients back on Earth. The universal language of illness, and the even more universal language of love, had brought her here. Now she just had to figure out how to speak the language of healing across species and star systems, armed with nothing but human stubbornness and the refusal to let hope die without a fight. Sarah woke to the gentle touch of Zeph's hand on her shoulder, and the sight of 3 suns rising over an alien horizon. The ship had come to rest on what appeared to be a landing platform made of the same organic material as the vessel itself, surrounded by buildings that seemed to grow from the ground like crystalline trees reaching toward the tri-star sky. "We're home," Zeph said softly, their golden eyes reflecting the complex interplay of light from the 3 suns. "How do you feel?" Sarah stretched carefully, surprised to find that she felt completely rested despite having slept in a chair during an interstellar journey. I feel remarkably good, actually. Better than I have in weeks. Our ships are designed to optimize rest during travel," Zeph explained. "The bioharmonics help synchronize your body's systems. We thought it was important for you to be at your best when you meet Mother." As Sarah gathered her belongings, she couldn't help but marvel at her surroundings. Through the ship's transparent sections, she could see other beings moving about their daily activities. The Andorians, as Zeph had called their people, came in various sizes and age groups, but all shared the same basic characteristics: the luminous golden eyes, the lavender-toned skin, and an overall sense of graceful movement that suggested perfect health and longevity. "Your people are beautiful," Sarah observed. "We are considered one of the more aesthetically developed species in the galaxy," Zev said with a matter-of-fact tone that held no arrogance. "Our ancestors modified our genetic code over thousands of generations to eliminate disease, extend life, and enhance physical appearance. That's what makes Mother's condition so puzzling and frightening." They disembarked from the ship onto the landing platform, where Sarah got her first real sense of being on an alien world. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, making each step feel effortless. The air smelled of something like cinnamon mixed with ocean breeze, despite no visible ocean in the immediate vicinity. In the distance, she could see what might have been mountains, but their peaks seemed to twist and spiral in ways that defied earthly geology. "The medical facility is this way," Zev said, leading her toward one of the crystal tree buildings. "Our best diagnosticians are eager to share their findings with you, and they've prepared a complete medical history of Mother's condition." As they walked, other Andorians stopped to look at Sarah with undisguised curiosity. She realized she was probably the first human many of them had ever seen. Their expressions ranged from interested to welcoming, but she noticed that several of them approached Zeph with obvious concern and affection, speaking in their musical language. "They're asking about Mother," Zeph translated. "Word of your arrival has spread, and many people are hoping you can help. Mother is well loved in our community." The medical facility was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light, and diagnostic equipment that looked more like art installations than medical devices hummed quietly in alcoves throughout the space. She was greeted by a tall Andorian wearing what appeared to be robes that shifted color like Zeph's clothing. "Dr. Chen," the being said in perfect unaccented English, "I am Dr. Jorik, Chief Medical Researcher for this facility. Thank you for making this extraordinary journey. I must confess, when Zeph first proposed contacting a human physician, I was skeptical. But your reputation preceded you, and your willingness to come here speaks to the qualities we had hoped to find."
"Thank you for having me," Sarah replied.
"I have to ask, how is it that you speak English so fluently?" Dr. Jorik gestured to a small device that appeared to be embedded seamlessly behind one ear. Universal translators are standard for anyone in the medical or diplomatic fields. The device reads neural patterns associated with language and provides real-time translation. We took the liberty of having one prepared for you as well, which will help you communicate with all members of our staff and, more importantly, with Zeph's mother. A young Andorian approached with a device similar to the one Dr. Jorik wore. The installation process was surprisingly simple and completely painless, involving nothing more than placing the translator near Sarah's ear and allowing it to interface with her nervous system. Within moments, she could hear the musical quality of the Andorian language overlaid with English translation, creating a surreal but effective communication experience. "Now," Dr. Jorik said, "let me show you what we've discovered about the condition affecting Zeph's mother." They moved to a diagnostic area where holographic displays showed three-dimensional models of Andorian neural anatomy. Sarah was fascinated to see that while the basic structure was different from human brains, the organization of neural pathways and the function of various regions showed remarkable similarities. "The patient's name is Lyra," Dr. Jorik explained, as detailed medical scans appeared in the air before them. "She's 847 standard years old, which is considered middle-aged for our species. The tremors began approximately 2 Earth years ago, starting in her dominant hand and gradually spreading to affect her entire motor system." Sarah studied the scans with growing excitement. The neural patterns showed clear signs of degradation in areas she recognized as analogous to the human basal ganglia, the same region affected by Huntington's disease and similar movement disorders. "Have you tested for genetic abnormalities?" she asked. "Extensively," Dr. Jorik replied. This is where our investigation reached an impasse. Andorian genetic engineering eliminated hereditary neurological disorders from our population over 3,000 years ago. Lyra's genetic profile shows no abnormalities, no mutations, no indicators that should cause this kind of degeneration.
"What about environmental factors?"
Toxins, infections, trauma? Nothing. She lives in one of our most protected communities, works as an artist creating harmonic sculptures, and has never been exposed to anything that should cause neurological damage. By all measures our medicine can detect, she should be perfectly healthy." Sarah felt the familiar thrill she always experienced when confronting a medical mystery. Can I see her current scans compared to baseline readings from before the symptoms began? Dr. Jorik manipulated the holographic display, showing brain scans from several years earlier alongside current images. The difference was stark. Where the earlier scans showed vibrant, healthy neural activity, the current readings revealed dark spots and irregular patterns that spoke of dying tissue and disrupted connections. This is definitely neurodegeneration, Sarah confirmed. But the pattern is unusual. In human patients with similar presentations, we typically see either genetic causes or clear environmental triggers. The fact that you've ruled both out suggests we might be dealing with something completely novel. Zeph, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. Dr. Chen, there's something else you should know. Mother isn't the only one. Sarah and Dr. Jorik both turned to look at the child with surprise. What do you mean? Dr. Jorik asked. I've been researching similar cases across our network, Zeph explained, their young face showing a seriousness beyond their apparent years. There are 17 other confirmed cases of identical symptoms among our people, scattered across 4 different star systems. All of them started within the last 5 Earth years. All affect individuals between 800 and 900 standard years old, and none show any genetic or environmental cause. Dr. Jorik's expression shifted to one of deep concern. Zeph, why wasn't I informed of this research? Because I knew you would try to stop me from contacting Dr. Foe. Chen, if you thought this was a widespread problem rather than an isolated case affecting my mother. Sarah felt her scientific instincts sharpening. 17 cases following the same pattern suggests either an epidemic cause or a previously unknown genetic factor that's only now expressing itself. In human medicine, when we see multiple cases of unusual neurological symptoms appearing in a specific age group across a broad geographic area, we start looking for common factors that might not be immediately obvious. Such as? Dr. Jorik asked. Shared experiences from decades earlier, environmental exposures with long latency periods, genetic modifications that have unexpected delayed effects, or even infectious agents that remain dormant for extended periods before causing symptoms. Zeph's eyes widened with hope. Does this mean you think you can help Mother and the others? It means we have more information to work with than I initially thought, Sarah replied carefully. But before I can make any determinations, I need to examine your mother directly and review the data from the other cases. Jorik nodded slowly. I'll arrange for the medical records from the other affected individuals to be transmitted here immediately. But first, would you like to meet Lyra? She's eager to see the human physician who traveled across the stars to help her. They moved through the medical facility to a comfortable residential area designed for long-term patients and their families. The space felt more like a luxury hotel than a hospital, with private quarters that opened onto gardens filled with plants that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Zeph led them to a door marked with flowing symbols that Sarah's translator identified as Lyra, daughter of stars, creator of harmonic beauty. The door opened at their approach, revealing a spacious apartment where a being sat in a chair by a large window overlooking the alien landscape. Sarah's first impression of Lyra was that she must once have been breathtakingly beautiful, even by Andorian standards. She was taller than her child, with the same golden eyes but more pronounced, elegant features. Her skin held a deeper lavender hue that seemed to shimmer slightly, and when she turned to greet them, Sarah could see intelligence and warmth radiating from her expression. But the tremors were immediately apparent. Lyra's hands shook constantly, and when she tried to stand to greet her visitors, the movement affected her entire body, making her appear frail and unsteady, despite her obvious attempts at dignity. Dr. Sarah Chen, Lyra said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as other Andorians, but with an underlying tremor that spoke of effort required to form each word. My child has told me so much about you. Thank you for coming to our world. Sarah approached carefully, noting how Lyra's symptoms seemed to worsen with movement or excitement. It's an honor to meet you, Lyra. Zeph spoke very eloquently about your situation, and I'm here to see what we can discover together. Together? Lyra repeated. And Sarah caught something in her tone that suggested the word held special meaning. That's a concept I haven't heard from our own physicians. They study me, they scan me, they discuss my condition among themselves. But they don't work with me. Human medicine has learned that the patient's perspective is often crucial to understanding disease, Sarah explained, settling into a chair near Lyra's. You live with your symptoms every day. You understand their patterns, their triggers, their effects, in ways that no scan can reveal. For the next 2 hours, Sarah conducted the most thorough patient interview of her career. She asked about everything: Lyra's work as an artist, her family history, her daily routines, her diet, her sleep patterns, her emotional state. But more importantly, she listened to Lyra describe her experience of the disease. It started so subtly, Lyra explained, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap as she spoke. I thought I was just tired from a particularly complex sculpture I was working on. The piece required very fine manipulations of harmonic crystals, and my hands began to shake slightly when I worked for extended periods. Did the shaking only happen during fine motor tasks at first? Yes, exactly. But over the months it began to occur during other activities, eating, writing, even just holding Zeph when they needed comfort. The worst part isn't the physical symptoms, Dr. Vincent. Chen. It's watching my child worry about me, seeing the fear in their eyes when the tremors are particularly bad. Sarah glanced at Zeph, who was listening intently despite having surely heard this story many times. The love between parent and child was obvious and heartbreaking. Lyra, I need to ask some questions that might seem unusual. In your work as an artist, do you use any special tools or materials? Are there specific techniques or technologies involved in creating harmonic sculptures? I work primarily with resonant crystals that respond to neural patterns, Lyra explained. The art form involves channeling one's own brainwave patterns through the crystals to create sculptures that produce music when touched or viewed. It requires a very deep neural connection between the artist and the medium. Sarah felt a spark of intuition. How long have you been working with these neural resonant crystals? Most of my adult life, nearly 600 years. And the other artists in your field, do they work with similar materials? Lyra's golden eyes sharpened with understanding. Yes, we all use variations of the same basic crystal matrix. Dr. Chen, are you suggesting there might be a connection? Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Fire, Jorik's communication device chimed, and he spoke briefly in Andorian before turning to the group. The medical records from the other affected individuals have arrived. Dr. Chen, I think you'll find them very interesting. They returned to the medical facility, where holographic displays now showed detailed information about 17 other Andorians suffering from identical symptoms. Sarah reviewed the data with growing excitement, looking for patterns that might have been missed by physicians unfamiliar with this type of disease progression. Dr. Jorik, she said after several minutes of study, what were the occupations of these other patients? Let me see. Harmonic artist, crystal sculptor, resonance engineer, neural pattern designer. He paused, his expression changing as he continued down the list. They're all artists or engineers who work with neural resonant technologies. Sarah turned to Zeph with barely contained excitement. Zeph, when you researched these cases, did you specifically look for people with similar symptoms, or did you search more broadly?
I looked for anyone with progressive movement disorders, Zeph replied.
Why? Because I think we need to search for everyone in these professions between the ages of 800 and 900, not just those who are currently showing symptoms. If my hypothesis is correct, we might be looking at the early stages of a much larger problem. The implications of Sarah's words settled over the group like a weight. If she was right, they weren't dealing with 18 isolated cases of a mysterious disease. They were potentially looking at an occupational epidemic that could affect hundreds or thousands of Andorians who had spent centuries working with neural resonant technologies. What do you think is causing it? Lyra asked quietly. Sarah looked at the woman whose child had crossed the galaxy to find help and felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I think your neural resonant crystals might be slowly altering your brain chemistry in ways that don't become apparent until decades of exposure. In human medicine, we call this cumulative toxicity. The good news is that if I'm right, we might be able to slow or stop the progression. The challenging news is that we're going to need to fundamentally rethink how your people interact with these technologies. Zeph moved to their mother's side, taking her shaking hand with gentle care. Does this mean you can help her? Sarah looked at the hope in both their faces, thought of the 17 other patients whose families were probably holding similar hopes, and felt the familiar fire of determination that had driven her through every impossible case she'd ever taken on. It means we're going to find out, she said firmly. But first, I need to understand exactly how these neural resonant crystals work, and I need to examine brain tissue from affected patients at the cellular level. We're going to solve this puzzle piece by piece. As the three sons of Zeph's world began to set outside the medical facility windows, casting complex shadows that danced like living art across the walls, Sarah Chen prepared to begin the most important diagnostic challenge of her career. Somewhere in the intersection between human medicine and alien technology lay the key to healing not just one desperate mother, but potentially hundreds of artists whose life's work had become their greatest threat. The bridge between heartbreak and healing, as Zeph had said, was hope. And hope, Sarah was beginning to understand, was humanity's greatest export to the galaxy. The neural resonant crystal laboratory was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The moment she entered the space where Lyra had spent centuries creating her harmonic sculptures, she felt a subtle vibration in her bones, as if the air itself was singing at frequencies just below the threshold of hearing. Crystalline structures of various sizes and colors lined the walls, each one pulsing gently with patterns of light that seemed to respond to her presence. "This is where I work," Lyra said, her voice filled with both pride and sadness as her trembling hands gestured toward a central workspace. "Or rather, where I used to work, before the shaking became too severe." "Doctor?" Jorik had provided Sarah with specialized diagnostic equipment that could analyze neural activity at the quantum level, technology that made her Earth-based instruments look primitive by comparison. But as she set up her workspace, she also unpacked several pieces of her own equipment, knowing that sometimes the most advanced solutions required the most basic approaches. "Tell me about the creative process," Sarah asked as she began scanning the ambient energy signatures in the room. "How exactly do you connect with these crystals?" Lyra moved carefully to her primary workstation, where a large, multifaceted crystal sat dormant in an intricate mounting system. Each crystal type resonates with different aspects of neural activity. "This one," she touched the central crystal with a shaking finger, "responds to emotional patterns. When I place my hands here and focus my thoughts and feelings, the crystal translates those mental patterns into physical vibrations that shape the sculpture." "And you do this for extended periods?" "Often for days at a time when working on complex pieces. The deeper the neural connection, the more profound and beautiful the resulting sculpture. It requires complete mental immersion." Sarah used her handheld scanner to examine the crystal Lyra had touched. The readings were fascinating and troubling. The mineral structure contained trace elements that weren't found in Earth's periodic table, compounds that appeared to be designed specifically to interface with neural tissue. More concerning, the scanner detected residual energy patterns that seemed to echo Lyra's own brainwave signatures. "Lyra, has anyone ever studied the long-term effects of neural resonant technology on the brain?" "Why would they?" "Doctor," Jorik interjected. "This technology has been in use for over 2,000 years. It's considered completely safe. In fact, many of our people believe that regular use of neural resonant devices enhances cognitive function and artistic ability." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "In human medicine, we've learned that technologies can seem perfectly safe for decades or even centuries before we discover subtle long-term effects. Lead paint was used for thousands of years before we understood its neurotoxic properties. Asbestos was considered a miracle material until we discovered its role in lung disease." She turned back to Lyra. "I need to examine your neural tissue at the cellular level. The scans, Dr. Jorik showed me reveal the macro-level damage, but I need to see what's happening to individual neurons. How do you propose to do that?" "Dr. Realis," Jorik asked, "we can't exactly perform brain surgery on a living patient to obtain tissue samples." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving on the alien world. "That's where human medicine might have something to offer your advanced civilization. We've developed non-invasive techniques for studying living neural tissue using high-resolution imaging and molecular markers." Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with Dr. Jorik to adapt her diagnostic techniques to Andorian physiology. It required combining her knowledge of neurological assessment with their advanced scanning technology, creating hybrid protocols that neither species could have developed alone. The results were both illuminating and deeply concerning. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a holographic display showing individual neurons from Lyra's motor cortex. "See these dark spots within the cell bodies? Those are protein aggregations similar to what we see in human neurodegenerative diseases. But the pattern is unlike anything in our medical literature." Dr. Jorik studied the images with growing alarm. "The aggregations appear to be composed of both native cellular proteins and something else, something that shouldn't be there." Sarah adjusted the scanning parameters to focus on the foreign elements. "These additional proteins have a crystalline structure similar to the neural resonant materials in your art studio. It's as if microscopic particles of the crystals have been incorporated into the neural tissue itself." "That's impossible, Doctor," Jorik said. "Neural resonant crystals work through electromagnetic field interactions. They don't physically penetrate living tissue." "Not the crystals themselves," Sarah explained, "but perhaps molecular fragments or energy signatures that accumulate over time. Think of it like radiation exposure. You can't see individual radiation particles, but they can cause cellular damage that accumulates over decades of exposure." Zeph, who had been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly spoke up. "Dr. Chen, If you're right about this, why haven't our physicians detected it before? Surely someone would have noticed a connection between neural resonant work and neurological problems. Because, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice, your physicians eliminated these types of diseases from your society so long ago that they forgot how to recognize them. When Lyra started showing symptoms, they looked for genetic causes or acute toxic exposures because those are the only mechanisms they understand. They never considered cumulative damage from a technology they considered safe. She turned to Dr. Jorik with growing excitement. This is actually good news. Good news? Lyra asked, her voice trembling along with her hands. How can brain damage be good news? Because if I'm right about the mechanism, there are treatment approaches we can try. In human medicine, when we see protein aggregations causing neural damage, we've developed therapies to help clear those proteins and protect healthy neurons from further damage. Sarah spent the rest of the day working with tissue samples and advanced diagnostic equipment, developing a comprehensive picture of how neural resonant technology was affecting Andorian brains. The process was insidious. Energy patterns from the crystals caused certain neural proteins to misfold and clump together, gradually interfering with normal cellular function. The damage accumulated so slowly that symptoms didn't appear until decades of exposure had occurred. But the most important discovery came when she compared samples from different patients. The pattern of damage was remarkably consistent, suggesting that the underlying mechanism was the same in all cases. This uniformity meant that treatments effective for one patient would likely work for others. I need to run some experimental procedures, Sarah announced as the workday drew to a close. But first I want to try something with you, Lyra. She led the group to a quiet room in the medical facility and asked Lyra to sit comfortably in a reclining chair. From her equipment case, she retrieved a device that looked surprisingly simple compared to the advanced alien technology surrounding them. This is a transcranial magnetic stimulation device, Sarah explained. It uses focused magnetic fields to stimulate specific areas of the brain. In human patients with similar protein aggregation diseases, TMS can sometimes help improve neural function temporarily.
Doctor.
Jorik watched with fascination as Sarah carefully positioned the device over Lyra's head, using her understanding of Andorian neural anatomy to target the areas showing the most damage.
You're going to stimulate her brain with magnetic fields?
How do you know it won't cause further damage? I don't know for certain, Sarah admitted, but the fields generated by this device are much weaker than the electromagnetic signatures your neural resonant crystals produce. If my theory is correct, brief, controlled stimulation might actually help break up some of the protein aggregations. The procedure took only 20 minutes, during which Lyra reported feeling a subtle tingling sensation but no discomfort. Sarah monitored her vital signs throughout, watching for any adverse effects. How do you feel? Sarah asked when the treatment was complete. Lyra sat up slowly, then held out her hands in front of her. For a moment, nothing seemed different. Then she looked up with an expression of amazement. They're trembling, she whispered. It's less. Not gone, but definitely reduced. Zeph gasped and moved to their mother's side. Indeed, while Lyra's hands still showed some tremor, the constant violent shaking had diminished to a barely perceptible tremor. Dr. Jorik immediately began scanning Lyra's neural activity. Remarkable. The improvement shows up clearly in the neural pathway readings. Dr. Chen, how long will this effect last? In human patients, anywhere from hours to days, Sarah replied. The key is that it proves the damage isn't completely irreversible. If we can develop ongoing treatment protocols, we might be able to stabilize or even improve function long-term. Over the following days, Sarah worked intensively with Dr. Choi, Jorik and his team to develop a comprehensive treatment approach. They combined her understanding of neurodegenerative processes with Andorian medical technology to create therapies that neither species could have developed alone. The treatment protocol involved several components: regular magnetic stimulation sessions to disrupt protein aggregations, medications to protect healthy neurons from further damage, and most importantly, strict limits on exposure to neural resonant technologies. The hardest part, Sarah explained during a meeting with affected artists and their families, will be accepting that continued use of neural resonant crystals will worsen the condition. I know this technology is central to your art and culture, but we need to find alternative approaches that don't require direct neural interface. An elderly Andorian artist named Corvin, one of the other affected individuals, raised his shaking hand. Dr. Chen, you're asking us to give up everything we've worked for our entire lives. Our art, our purpose, our identity. Sarah felt the weight of his words. She'd seen human patients struggle with similar losses when disease forced them to abandon careers and passions.
I understand how devastating this must be.
But consider this. If we can halt the progression and improve your symptoms, you might be able to return to creating art using different methods. Your experience, your artistic vision, your understanding of beauty. None of that is lost. Lyra spoke up from the audience. Dr. Chen is right. I've been thinking about this since my treatment began. Perhaps it's time for our art to evolve. We've been using the same neural resonant techniques for 2,000 years. Maybe this challenge is an opportunity to discover new forms of creative expression. Young Zeph, who had been quietly working with Dr. Jorick's research team, suddenly stepped forward. I may have an idea about that. All eyes turned to the child, who had started this entire journey by refusing to give up hope for their mother. I've been studying Dr. Chaos, Chen's treatment techniques and our neural resonant technology, Zeph explained. What if we could modify the crystals to work indirectly? Instead of direct neural interface, we could use external sensors to read brainwave patterns and translate them into crystal vibrations. Without requiring prolonged mental immersion, Dr. Jorick's eyes lit up with understanding. Reduced exposure while maintaining artistic capability. It's brilliant in its simplicity. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she watched Zev present their idea. The child's refusal to accept limitations, their determination to find solutions rather than merely accept problems, reminded her of the best qualities she'd seen in human medical researchers. There's something else, Zeph continued. Doctor, Chen's treatments are working for Mother and the other patients, but they require ongoing sessions. What if we combined her magnetic stimulation techniques with our healing crystals? Not for artistic purposes, but specifically for medical therapy. The idea was revolutionary. Using the same technology that had caused the disease to help heal it, but with carefully controlled parameters and specific therapeutic intent rather than prolonged artistic immersion. Sarah found herself working alongside Endorian engineers and artists to develop new hybrid technologies that combined human medical insights with alien engineering capabilities. They created modified neural resonant devices specifically designed for healing rather than artistic expression, therapeutic protocols that could be used safely by patients with existing damage. More importantly, they developed screening procedures to identify individuals who might be at risk before symptoms appeared and preventive guidelines for artists who wanted to continue working with neural resonant technology safely. You know what's remarkable about this, Doctor? Jorick said during one of their late-night research sessions. Your species has taught us something we'd forgotten, that advancing technology isn't always about becoming more sophisticated. Sometimes it's about understanding the wisdom of restraint. Sarah looked around the laboratory, where humans and aliens work side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives that neither could have achieved alone. We've learned something too. Human medicine has always been limited by our technology. Working with your capabilities has shown us possibilities we never imagined. As weeks passed and the treatment protocols were refined, all 18 affected patients showed significant improvement. Lyra's tremors had reduced to the point where she could eat normally and embrace her child without difficulty. More importantly, her cognitive function remained sharp, and her artistic vision intact. I want to show you something, Lyra said during one of Sarah's final visits to the art laboratory. She led Sarah to a new workspace, where modified neural resonant equipment had been installed according to the safety protocols they'd developed. This is my first piece created with the new techniques, Lyra explained, gesturing to a crystalline sculpture that seemed to pulse with gentle, warm light. It's different from my earlier work, less intense perhaps, but I think it has its own beauty. Sarah watched in wonder as the sculpture responded to ambient sounds and movements, creating subtle shifts in color and luminosity that somehow conveyed deep emotional resonance without the overwhelming sensory impact of traditional neural resonant art. It's beautiful, Sarah said sincerely, and it represents something even more important than artistic achievement. It represents adaptation, growth, and hope. Zeph joined them, their young face showing a maturity that hadn't been there when they first contacted Sarah. Dr. Chen, I've been accepted to the Galactic Medical Academy. I want to study interspecies medicine so that I can help solve problems like this for other civilizations.
What inspired that decision? Sarah asked.
You did, Zeph replied simply. You showed me that the most important medical breakthroughs come from refusing to accept that something is impossible. I want to carry that approach to other worlds, other species that might need help their own physicians can't provide. As Sarah prepared for her journey back to Earth, she reflected on everything she'd learned during her time among the stars. She'd come to help one sick mother and found herself helping to reshape an entire civilization's approach to technology and medicine. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler, that healing was truly universal, transcending species and star systems. Love, hope, determination, and the refusal to give up on someone who needed help. These were constants that connected all sentient beings. The ship that would carry her home was different from the one that had brought her to Zeph's world. This one contained detailed medical records, new treatment technologies, and most importantly, formal agreements for ongoing collaboration between human and Andorian physicians. Earth was about to benefit from medical advances that could revolutionize treatment for neurological diseases, while the Andorian collective had gained new perspectives on the importance of considering long-term consequences of even the most beneficial technologies. But as Sarah looked back at Lyra and Zeph waving goodbye from the landing platform, their hands steady and their faces bright with hope, she knew that the most important healing had already taken place. A desperate child's love for their mother had bridged the gap between worlds, proving that some forces in the universe were stronger than any disease. 6 months after Sarah's return to Earth, her life had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. The small laboratory where she'd first encountered Zeph's desperate plea had been expanded into a state-of-the-art facility, funded by a coalition of governments and research institutions, all eager to understand the medical breakthroughs she'd brought back from the stars. But the most significant changes weren't in her laboratory equipment or research budget. They were in her inbox, which had become a constant stream of communications from across the galaxy. "Dr. Chen," said the latest holographic transmission. "This one from a crystalline being whose body seemed to be composed entirely of living gemstone. I am Ambassador Quarex from the Silicon Collective. We have heard of your work with the Andorians, and we believe we may have a similar crisis developing among our people." Sarah paused in reviewing genetic sequencing data to give the transmission her full attention. Over the past months, she'd received similar requests from 17 different alien civilizations, each facing medical mysteries that their advanced technologies couldn't solve. The pattern was becoming clear. Highly advanced societies that had conquered the obvious diseases and eliminated genetic disorders were discovering that their very sophistication had left them vulnerable to subtle long-term effects of their own technologies, problems that required the kind of old-fashioned medical detective work that Earth physicians had never been able to abandon. "Dr. Chen," came another voice from her communication system, this one familiar and welcome. Zeph's image materialized in the air above her desk, looking older and more confident than when they'd first met. "Zeph, how are your mother and the other patients doing?" "Wonderfully," Zeph replied, their golden eyes sparkling with happiness. "Mother completed her latest sculpture last week, and all 18 original patients have shown continued improvement. But I'm calling with news about the broader investigation we've been conducting." Sarah leaned forward with interest. Since discovering the neural resonant crisis, Zeph had been working with a team of Andorian researchers to investigate whether similar problems existed throughout their civilization's use of various technologies. "What have you found?" "It's bigger than we thought," Zeph said, their expression growing serious. "We've identified potential long-term effects from at least 7 different technologies that have been considered completely safe for centuries. Regenerative medicine that may cause cellular instability after decades of use. Consciousness transfer techniques that appear to cause gradual memory degradation. Even our space travel technology that might be affecting our reproductive systems." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and concern. "How extensive are we talking about?" "Potentially millions of individuals across our civilization, and probably similar numbers among other advanced species that use comparable technologies." The implications hit Sarah like a wave. She'd thought she was helping one family with a mysterious disease. Instead, she'd stumbled onto what might be the greatest medical crisis in galactic history. "Zeph, this is enormous. No single physician or research team could possibly address problems on that scale." "Exactly," Zeph said, and Sarah caught a hint of the enthusiasm that had first drawn her to help the alien child. "That's why I'm calling. I've been working with physicians and researchers from multiple species to propose something unprecedented, a galactic medical cooperation initiative." Over the next hour, Zeph outlined an ambitious plan that took Sarah's breath away. The initiative would bring together medical experts from dozens of civilizations, sharing knowledge and perspectives to address problems that no single species could solve alone. Earth, despite being one of the least technologically advanced participants, would play a central role because of humanity's unique approach to medical problem solving.
"The Council of Species has provisionally approved the initiative," Zeph explained, "but they want to speak with you directly before making a final decision."
You're the physician who started all of this, and your participation would be crucial to its success.
Sarah stared at the holographic display showing proposed medical research facilities that would dwarf anything on Earth, collaborative networks spanning hundreds of star systems, and research budgets that could fund every medical project she'd ever dreamed of.
When do they want to meet?
She asked. Next week, if you're available. The Council meets on a neutral space station in the Centauri system.
We can provide transportation and all necessary accommodations. After Zeph's transmission ended, Sarah sat in her laboratory considering the magnitude of what was being proposed. She thought of her father, of all the patients she'd treated over the years, of the countless families who had come to her hoping for miracles that medicine couldn't yet provide. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity's medical limitations, the very things that made Earth seem primitive compared to galactic civilization, had turned out to be their greatest strength. While other species had advanced beyond traditional disease, humans had continued to struggle with problems that kept their medical thinking flexible and innovative. A week later, Sarah found herself aboard an Andorian vessel approaching what appeared to be a massive crystalline structure floating in the void between stars. The Council Station was unlike anything she'd ever imagined, a living space habitat that seemed to pulse with its own internal light, hosting representatives from civilizations that spanned the galaxy. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Mir, Jorik, who had volunteered to accompany Sarah to the council meeting. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "I'm about to address the most advanced medical minds in the galaxy about problems they couldn't solve themselves. 6 months ago, I was just a human neurologist working in a small laboratory on a planet most of them had never heard of. And that," said Zeph, who had insisted on being present for the proceedings, "is exactly why they need to hear from you." The council chamber was vast beyond comprehension, with seating arrangements that accommodated the wildly different physiological needs of dozens of species. Sarah saw beings of crystalline silicon, creatures that appeared to be composed of organized energy fields, entities that existed primarily in gaseous form, and species whose biology defied any earthly comparison. When called upon to address the assembly, Sarah felt the weight of representing not just herself, but all of human medicine and Earth's approach to healing. "Honored council members," she began, her voice amplified by translation systems that rendered her words in dozens of languages and communication methods. 6 months ago, I received a call for help from a desperate child whose mother was dying of a disease that your advanced medicine couldn't cure. What I've learned since then has implications that extend far beyond any individual patient or species." She gestured, and holographic displays showed the data she'd gathered about neural resonant disease, the treatment protocols developed through human Andorian collaboration, and the emerging evidence of similar problems affecting other civilizations. "The crisis we're facing isn't really medical," Sarah continued. "It's philosophical. Your species have achieved medical advances that eliminated obvious diseases and obvious causes of suffering. But in doing so, you've also eliminated the need for the kind of broad-spectrum diagnostic thinking that less advanced civilizations are forced to maintain." A being that appeared to be composed entirely of shifting light patterns spoke up, their words translated as, "Are you suggesting that medical advancement itself has made us vulnerable?" "I'm suggesting that any technology advanced enough to seem like magic carries risks that may not be apparent for decades or centuries," Sarah replied. "Human medicine deals with these problems constantly because our technology isn't sophisticated enough to eliminate them. We've learned to look for subtle patterns, cumulative effects, and interactions between multiple factors because we have to." She paused, looking around the vast chamber at representatives of civilizations that had conquered death, disease, and the limitations of biological existence. "What I'm proposing is that we combine your technological capabilities with human medicine's diagnostic approaches, not because humans are superior physicians, but because we've been forced to develop skills that more advanced civilizations no longer need, until they suddenly do." The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Representative after representative spoke of medical mysteries affecting their people, problems that seem to emerge from nowhere and resist all conventional treatment approaches. The Crystalline Collective has been experiencing unexplained fragmentation disorders among individuals who have undergone extensive consciousness enhancement procedures, reported Ambassador Quarex. The Energy Confederation has identified degradation syndromes affecting beings who have spent centuries in pure energy form, added another representative. The Bioadaptive Alliance is seeing reproductive failures among species that have relied on artificial genetic modification for millennia, came a third report. As Sarah listened, she realized the scope of the crisis was even larger than Zeph had indicated. Dozens of civilizations were facing the unexpected consequences of technologies they'd used safely for centuries or millennia. and none of them had the diagnostic frameworks to understand what was happening. The Galactic Medical Cooperation Initiative, announced the council chair, a being whose species Sarah couldn't begin to identify, is hereby approved with full council support. Dr. Chen, will you serve as Chief Diagnostic Coordinator for the initiative? Sarah felt her heart racing as she considered the magnitude of what was being offered. She would have access to medical technologies beyond human imagination, resources that could advance Earth's medicine by centuries, and the opportunity to help patients across dozens of star systems. But more than that, she would be representing humanity's approach to medicine on a galactic stage, proving that sometimes the most advanced solutions came from the most fundamental principles of healing. I accept, she said, with the condition that Earth becomes a full participating member in the initiative, and that human medical students are welcome to train alongside physicians from other species. Granted, the chair replied immediately. When can you begin? Over the following months, Sarah found herself splitting time between Earth and a new medical research facility constructed specifically for the initiative. The facility, located on a planet that served as neutral ground for multiple species, was unlike anything she could have imagined. Laboratories that could accommodate wildly different atmospheric and environmental requirements stood side by side. Research teams composed of beings whose biology spanned the entire spectrum of possible life worked together on problems that affected entire civilizations. And at the center of it all, human medical principles of careful observation, methodical investigation, and refusal to accept easy answers guided research that utilized technologies beyond Earth's wildest dreams. Dr. Chen, said Dr. Tren. Veltar, a gaseous being who served as the initiative's coordinator for energy-based life forms. We've identified the cause of degradation syndrome among the Confederation species. Your diagnostic protocols led us to discover that prolonged existence in energy form causes a previously unknown type of quantum decay. Excellent work, Sarah replied, reviewing the data on her holographic display. What treatment approaches are you considering? That's where we need human insight again. Doctor, Veltar admitted. Our technology can identify the problem and even reverse the damage, but we can't prevent it from recurring. The affected individuals want to maintain their energy form existence, but continued exposure will cause the same problems. Sarah smiled, recognizing a familiar pattern. It sounds like you need to develop the equivalent of what human medicine calls lifestyle modifications, ways for your patients to maintain their preferred existence while reducing their risk of quantum decay, perhaps cycling between energy and more stable forms, or finding ways to reinforce quantum stability during energy existence. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. Sarah's research assistant appeared on the display, looking excited and slightly overwhelmed. Dr. Chen, we've just received a communication from something calling itself the Hive Confederation. They say they represent several species that exist as collective consciousnesses, and they're requesting assistance with what they describe as individuation syndrome. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of encountering a new medical mystery. Individuation syndrome in collective consciousness species, that's completely outside anything we've encountered before. Set up a consultation session for tomorrow and ask Dr. Jorek to join us. This is going to require perspectives from multiple species. As the communication ended, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since Seth's desperate call for help had first appeared in her laboratory. She'd thought she was dealing with a single case of a mysterious neurological disorder. Instead, she'd discovered her life's work, serving as a bridge between human medicine's diagnostic traditions and galactic civilization's technological capabilities. The initiative was expanding rapidly, with new species requesting consultation almost daily. Each case brought unique challenges that required combining human medical intuition with alien technology and biology. But more importantly, each success story proved that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had something to learn from humanity's approach to healing. Chen, said a new voice from her communication system. This transmission came from a species she hadn't encountered before. Tall, ethereal beings with multiple arms and faces that seemed to shift between different expressions. I am Dr. Multiphase Zen from the Adaptive Collective, the being said. We have heard of your work with the initiative and we have a problem that may interest you. Our people have been experiencing what we can only describe as reality dissociation syndrome. Individuals who have used our consciousness expansion technologies are losing the ability to distinguish between actual experiences and simulated realities. Sarah leaned forward with interest. How long have your people been using consciousness expansion technologies? Approximately 4,000 of your years. And this syndrome has only recently appeared? within the last 50 years, affecting primarily individuals between their third and fourth millennia of life. Sarah felt the familiar spark of recognition. Another case of technology that seemed perfectly safe until cumulative effects reached a threshold that triggered symptoms. Another mystery that advanced medicine couldn't solve because it required thinking outside the framework of technological solutions. Dr. Multiphase Zen, she said, I think we can help you. But first, I need to understand exactly how your consciousness expansion technology works, and I need detailed medical histories of affected individuals. As she began planning another interstellar consultation, Sarah realized that her role in galactic medicine was becoming larger than she'd ever imagined. She wasn't just treating individual patients anymore. She was helping entire civilizations understand the hidden costs of their own advancement. The irony continued to amaze her. Humanity's medical limitations, which had seemed like such disadvantages compared to galactic technology, had turned out to be their greatest strength. Because humans couldn't eliminate disease and suffering with advanced technology, they'd been forced to develop diagnostic skills that more advanced civilizations had forgotten they needed. But perhaps the most important realization was that healing truly was universal. Whether she was treating a human patient with Huntington's disease or an alien collective consciousness suffering from reality dissociation syndrome, the fundamental principles remained the same: careful observation, methodical investigation, and most importantly, the refusal to give up hope when someone needed help. The galaxy was discovering that humanity's greatest export wasn't technology or resources. It was something far more valuable: the stubborn insistence that no problem was unsolvable if you were willing to ask the right questions and refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. And it had all started with one desperate child who refused to let their mother shake without a fight. 3 years after first stepping foot on an alien world to help a desperate mother, Sarah Chen stood before the assembled representatives of 96 galactic civilizations, preparing to deliver what would become known as the most important medical address in known history. The occasion was the first galactic medical conference held aboard a massive space habitat specifically constructed for the event. Behind her, holographic displays showed the staggering results of the Galactic Medical Cooperation Initiative. Hundreds of previously mysterious diseases identified and treated, dozens of civilizations saved from technological medical crises, and most importantly, the establishment of diagnostic principles that were revolutionizing medicine across the galaxy. But as Sarah looked out at the incredible diversity of life forms assembled before her, she thought not of statistics or technological breakthroughs, but of Lyra and Zeph, the alien mother and child whose love had started everything. 3 years ago, Sarah began, her words translated into countless languages and communication methods, a child contacted me with a simple request. Please fix my mother, she won't stop shaking. That child couldn't have known that their mother's trembling hands would shake the foundations of galactic medicine itself. In the front section of the vast auditorium, she could see Zeph, now a medical student specializing in interspecies diagnostic protocols, sitting beside their mother Lyra, whose hands were steady as she took notes. Beside them sat Dr. Pykoff, Jorik, who had become Sarah's closest collaborator in developing the initiative's treatment protocols. What we've learned since then has transformed our understanding of the relationship between medical advancement and medical wisdom, Sarah continued. We've discovered that the most sophisticated technologies can create the most subtle problems, and that sometimes the most advanced solutions require the most fundamental approaches to healing. The presentation that followed detailed case studies from across the galaxy. The Silicon Collective's crystal fragmentation syndrome, caused by millennia of consciousness enhancement procedures. The Energy Confederation's quantum decay disorders resulting from extended existence in pure energy form. The Bioadaptive Alliance's reproductive cascade failures, triggered by artificial genetic modifications that had seemed beneficial for thousands of years. In each case, the solution had required combining human diagnostic approaches with alien technology, proving that medical advancement wasn't just about developing new tools, but about maintaining the wisdom to use them properly. The greatest breakthrough of the initiative hasn't been technological, Sarah explained as her presentation reached its conclusion. It's been philosophical. We've learned that true medical advancement requires balancing technological capability with diagnostic humility. She paused, looking around the auditorium at beings whose civilizations spanned millions of years of medical development. Human medicine has a saying: when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. It means that common problems are more likely than exotic ones. But we've discovered that in galactic medicine, we need a new principle. When advanced civilizations develop mysterious symptoms, Think technology, not mystery. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from civilizations across the galaxy rose to their feet, wings, energy manifestations, or whatever appendages they possessed, expressing approval in dozens of different ways. But more importantly, many of them were already implementing initiative protocols to investigate potential technological health effects within their own societies. After the formal presentation, Sarah made her way through crowds of alien physicians, researchers, and government representatives, all eager to discuss collaborative projects or seek consultation for their own medical mysteries. But her destination was a quiet observation lounge where Zeph and Lyra were waiting with Dr. Bear, China, Jorik, and several other members of the original Andorian medical team. Dr. Chen, Lyra said as Sarah approached, rising gracefully from her chair with no trace of the tremors that had once defined her existence. I wanted to thank you again, not just for healing me, but for everything you've accomplished since then. I didn't accomplish any of this alone, Sarah replied, settling into a chair beside the group. Zeph's refusal to give up hope started everything. Your willingness to trust a strange alien physician made it possible, and Dr. Jorik's collaboration made it successful. Zeph, who now bore the title of Junior Research Coordinator for the initiative, leaned forward with the same intense focus that had first drawn Sarah to help them. Dr. Chen, there's something else we wanted to discuss with you. The initiative has been so successful that the Council of Species has approved an expansion proposal, but it requires your agreement.
What kind of expansion? Dr. SPLSTI?
Jorik answered. They want to establish a permanent galactic medical academy with campuses in multiple star systems and curricula that combine diagnostic approaches from all participating civilizations. You've been asked to serve as the Academy's first Dean of Diagnostic Sciences. Sarah felt her breath catch. The position would represent the pinnacle of galactic medical achievement, overseeing the training of physicians who would serve throughout known space, combining the best medical knowledge from dozens of civilizations. There's more, Zeph added. The Academy would have a special focus on what they're calling primitive diagnostic protocols, the fundamental observational and analytical skills that more advanced civilizations have forgotten. Earth would host one of the primary campuses, making it a center of galactic medical education. The implications were staggering. Earth, which had been considered medically primitive just 3 years earlier, would become one of the most important medical training centers in the galaxy. Human physicians would work alongside alien colleagues, sharing diagnostic techniques that had been developed out of necessity but proven invaluable across species. What about my research here? Sarah asked. My patients on Earth? The position would allow you to continue your clinical work while overseeing Academy development, Dr. Jorik explained. In fact, your ongoing patient care would be considered essential to maintaining the Academy's focus on practical diagnostic skills. Sarah looked around the observation lounge at the alien cityscape visible through the transparent walls, thinking of the incredible journey that had brought her from a small Earth laboratory to the heights of galactic medicine. But more than that, she thought of all the patients across the galaxy who were suffering from problems their own civilizations couldn't solve, waiting for physicians trained in the kind of broad-spectrum diagnostic thinking the Academy would provide. I accept, she said finally, with one condition. Name it, Zeph said immediately. Zeph becomes the Academy's first Director of Student Services. If we're going to train physicians to work across species and star systems, we need someone who understands what it means to reach across impossible distances to find hope when none seems to exist. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Representatives from dozens of civilizations offered congratulations, shared their own medical challenges and successes, and expressed enthusiasm for collaborative training programs that would revolutionize medicine throughout the galaxy. But the moment that meant the most came when Lyra approached her with a small glowing sculpture in her hands. This is my latest work, Lyra explained, offering the piece to Sarah. It's called The Bridge Between Heartbreak and Healing. I created it using the new safe techniques you helped us develop, but more importantly, it contains harmonic patterns based on neural recordings from our first meeting. Sarah took the sculpture, feeling its subtle warmth, and watching the gentle play of light within its crystalline structure. When she held it close, she could hear faint musical tones that somehow conveyed the emotions of hope, gratitude, and determination that had defined their